Hi, welcome to Virtual Failure. I'm Andre Murphy, and this afternoon I'm joined by Joint First Minister Michelle O'Neill. Michelle, you're very welcome to St Mary's College this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Andre. Delighted to be interviewed by yourself.
I'm going to begin the interview by going back to your own roots, Doris in Killeisland, County Tyrone. And I'm interested to know a little bit more about you, the woman who comes to this amazing position in our executive. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So, as you say, I'm from a small village outside Killeisland called Clonoe. We're very parochial up our way. You have to be very correct about that. So I have strong family roots there. Both my daddy's family come from there. My mummy's family are from a village a couple of miles over in Stewartstown. So all of my family are still there. Very much a very, certainly for me growing up, I loved where I come from. I love the people. I'm still very embedded in the community that I grew up in. The people that I went to school with, all, people that still live around. I suppose I grew up in a family where mummy and daddy both always worked only as myself and my brother in our house, and the four of us would have been a very tight unit and worked together. Mummy and daddy would have been out working every day, and Brian and I would have been we all had to chip in. Everybody had to do their part. Just any sort of normal, typical working class Catholic family growing up in Tyrone. So a very good experience, I have to say, growing up. I'm very lucky, I think, to have the family that I have, the support that I've always had down through the years. There only is me and my brother, so we are very tight, very supportive of each other, very protective of each other. It's okay for me to shout at him, not for anybody else to shout at him. So I do enjoy a brilliant family life, I have to say, and I'm very proud just of my roots, where I come from my family connections. I'm somebody who was always reared with a strong sense of family, and I think I get that from my two grannies, actually, for very different reasons.
Yeah.
So I had one granny, my mummy's mummy, who was a real lady, softly spoken, very kind, gentle character. And then I had my daddy's mummy, who was a feisty Republican activist. I think I have a wee bit of both of them in me. Well, at least I claim that anyway.
Yeah.
I think I have a wee bit of both of them in me. But they both were women who reared their families, strong sense of family unit, coming together, eating together.
Yes.
Would have been a big thing. And like going to your granny's on a Sunday for your dinner was like a must. And I kind of try to carry on their traditions. And I think I get great strength from those two women. And then also from my own mummy and daddy, who just were always just great people, ordinary people, but they were they're my parents. And sadly, Daddy's died. He died 13 years ago. Well, he's a big miss to us, but we have mummy, and we have a good family. And I think over the past 6 months of COVID, or 6 months of COVID, I think we've all got a wee sense of reigniting the family bond that's always there. And I think there's something good to come from COVID. That's the thing that I would certainly take from it.
I think that's true. I certainly found that as a mother, that connection with kids that's there. And of course, Clonoe and Killeisland had a particular experience of conflict as well. So your growing up would have had the conflict as a backdrop to that. And your own dad's brother or cousin, Tony, was assassinated in 1991. What was that like growing up? Was that kind of normal, or did you always know that this was an abnormal situation?
I think you did, because you were born into it. I was born in 1977. So, the height of conflict, it was all around me. It was very hard to escape. My house wasn't necessarily a political house, but my father was obviously a political activist. And you kind of grow up with it being the norm that you had British troops patrolling the streets, that you were regularly stopped and, you were harassed. It was it just was the way of life that we lived through. But, the resilient nature of us, we always just, probably at the time, you're just in the middle of living. You're just going through what is your norm. But certainly when you reflect back on it and look at it, it was the most challenging at times for everybody. Lots of people lost their lives, and we can recount many experiences, harrowing experiences of actually what happened in terms of conflict locally. So I feel like it was part and parcel of my growing up. That doesn't mean for any second that it was normal, because it wasn't normal. No child should have to grow up and live through what many, many people here have had to live through. So I'd say my experience is fairly typical of many people, but I think certainly for me growing up, we had a serious, strong sense of community in Tyrone. I think we clung to each other because of the circumstance that was unfolding on around us. And we didn't choose this. This was the life in which we were born into, and it was the political circumstance of the time. But I certainly don't want any child to ever go through that again. I'll make it, that's my determination as a political leader, to make sure that we never have something like that happen again on our island.
So you're a young woman with all of these influences in your local area. Can you remember the moment where you said, I'm going to be politically active. I'm going to take that on for me in my life?
Well, I suppose I was I would think about a number of things. So I would think about what was the first thing that I can remember being a political thing that impacted on me. In my house growing up, your house being raided was a normal thing. And I can actually still hear the sound of the Land Rovers coming. I can hear that and my daddy shouting that we needed to get up. And that was me and my brother's experience. You were watching to see, did they plant anything in your house? That was actually our role as children. Like, that is just incredible. And that's a story that needs to be told about. That was the reality of our conflict. My daddy was a political activist, so he's an ex-prisoner. He also went on to become elected at a time whenever it was really, really unsafe for a Sinn Féin activist to be elected. As the time whenever Sinn Féin councillors were being killed, John Davey being one, which is close to me. And so Daddy was active, and he was the go-to person in our community. So he was somebody who was a fixer. He helped everybody, but he was the most reasonable man you ever could have met, and he could reason his way out of everything. He was no public speaker. He could not talk publicly. Like, he knew it was a joke that he couldn't talk publicly, but he was the person that if you needed help and you needed something sorted out, he was the person that could just bring conflicting interests around the table, and actually you could always find a solution. So I think I grew up with that all around me, and then I thought one day, I can do that. I can help my community, because he was a simple man in many ways, but he just wanted to do right by people. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to do better for his community. And I thought, well, I can do that. And I think that's kind of, naturally how I fell into politics. And then I think around the time of the Good Friday Agreement, I was already an activist. But then the party were asking, or we needed people to come and work in the party, and they hadn't had this experience before of employing people. And I just think from 1998 on, everything I have done is just, my whole life is just, it just overtakes, it becomes who you are it's not a job, it's a vocation in many ways, but it's a way of life. And being a political activist, being able to do right by your community, stand up for people, I realised very early on, this is something that I'm very passionate about. And I suppose just then as a Republican, Sinn Féin was the vehicle that was going to deliver United Ireland. So I wanted to be part of that. So that's kind of how it all began.
And then you become elected as a councillor for Dungannon and become the first woman mayor of Dungannon. What was that like? And how did you meet that? Was that just another step, or were there particular challenges with that?
Well, I think the first time I went into council, I was really, really shocked. I was like, where's all the women? Because I don't think I'd actually even realised at that stage that how bad it was. So I first went into council in 2005. And for 5 years, there was, I think, maybe only 2 women in the council that whole time. And then to be elected as the first female mayor, like in the whole history of the council, they'd never had a woman at the helm. I just found that incredible. So for me, it was like, it's something I'm hugely proud of, but for me, it was for everybody else. It was for all the women out there that want to do something and never, maybe it wasn't encouraged or promoted. And I just wanted to say, we can do anything that we want. And for me, it was very much about that as well. But it also was, incredible that I could go to every forum and say, do you know I'm the first female mayor? I'd love to say that, because it actually gave people hope that actually things were changing and there was opportunity. And for me, it was very much about that. So I loved the year as mayor, but it was a very challenging year because I was also double jobbing. I was elected to the Assembly in 2007.
Right.
So for 5 years, I was a councillor and in the Assembly. And in 2010, the year I became the first female mayor, I was also the vice chair of the Health Committee in Stormont. So I can remember rallying up and down the motorway, like flat out, trying to get from the Assembly to get up to do council meetings and things. So it was a really, really big year for me. Like, politically, it was a lot of heavy lifting, but a year I'd never change. I loved it.
And that's really interesting that it's in parallel to big, big political moves that are being made at the time, So, you're elected as an MLA at a time after the policing debate and there's big, big changes. For you, though, with such community roots, how did you find the difference between being a councillor, being an MLA? Which would you prefer?
So there's joys in both. It's all elected life, so I suppose the principle's there. But I think as a local councillor, it's bread and butter politics. You can see what you're doing every day. So you're helping such and such, and you're able to turn something around for them very quickly. And it might be a simple thing to you, but everything is relative, and it might be a big thing to them. So I think as a councillor, you see that every day in what you're doing. As an MLA, when you're making policy and strategies, it's a bit more longer term thinking. And you nearly have to adjust yourself to not having a win every day. But there's a longer term plan at play. So it's different in that sense. So I like doing both of them. I loved the council. I actually think the best grounding for an MLA is to come through the council. That's my own personal experience. But because I think it just gives you a better understanding of the community that you come from and you represent, and it allows you to bring that experience into the assembly, because it's very easy for people to get caught up in policies and strategies and forget about the real person. And politics is about making change for people. And you have to be able to relate to what's important to people. And so I think it's good grounding for anybody to come through council.
Certainly. And then, of course, this meteoric political rise continues. You become the Minister for Agriculture. And what was that like? Because even though there had been a woman in with Michelle Gildernew before you, it's a traditional sort of male-dominated industry. And so, were there particular challenges with it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember whenever Martin phoned me and asked me to meet him, and this is whenever he asked me to take on the Department of Agriculture. And I remember him and I sitting in the living room, and he said to me, I want you to become part of my team. I want you to take on a ministerial post. And I said, okay. And I said, which one? And he said, agriculture and rural development. And I thought, my immediate reaction was, I'm not a farmer. I said to Martin, I'm from a rural community, as you know. I said, but I'm not a farmer. So I don't, he said, you don't need to worry about that. He actually said to me, is the health minister a doctor? Yeah. Which I thought was a very fair point. He actually said to me directly, he said, you have the skills and attributes to do the job, the brief you'll learn. And that's kind of how it all started. So yes, it was daunting at the start, but you very quickly get into it. And then I wanted to prioritise rural communities, because the department traditionally would have been about farmers, about big farmers, and not about the small hill farmer, for example, and not so much about rural communities. So we wanted to change the emphasis in that department, and that was why actually we chose that department for the second time, because you're right, Michelle had been in the department the term before. So we were able to carry on a lot of good work there. So it was very challenging on a number of fronts. So there was resistance from political unionism for me to try and change that approach to away from the big farmer to the small farmer, and to change the emphasis on rural, to the point where they took me to court for one of my decisions to try and put more money into rural communities. So I think that I didn't, that's all part and parcel of the politics of it, but I'm glad I did it. It was the right thing to do. I think we did refocus that department. So it was a challenging department for many reasons. That at that time, common agricultural policy reform, that was a big thing. So I was in Brussels negotiating on an ongoing basis for years. So that was a big work. But we did really good work around tackling poverty and isolation, promoting and encouraging rural communities and what we could do to support them. So yeah, I did love that department as well.
Yeah, and you have some class wellies. Only one pair or lots of lots
many
pairs?
wellies. Many wellies.
Was that a particular shopping trip, or did people bring them to you?
I actually remember whenever I was given the post, we were having a celebration for the recent election, and I was presented with a pair of pink flowery wellies.
Of course you were.
Which I still have.
Do you prefer them to heels?
Well, everything has its occasion.
And you mentioned your relationship with Martin McGuinness. I'm sure that it was there beforehand, but obviously as a part of the ministerial team, it would have grown. What was that like? Having this huge international person who's in charge of the team. What was that like for you?
Okay, he was absolutely first class. I mean, the man was just genuine. From morning to night, he was genuine. He was a very caring person, straight down the line. If he was mad at you, you knew he was mad at you. He had this look that he gave you. But he was so encouraging to me down through the years. So I've known Martin all of my life. I don't remember a time where he wasn't about my life. But obviously he stood for election in 1997 in Mid-Ulster, where he unseated Willie McRae. So that was the first time that Nationals had taken that seat. And so that probably became the start of Martin and myself knowing each other more. But it probably was about 10 years later where we became even closer because of the Assembly election and me being in the Assembly, working as part of his team. And he was just the most encouraging man. Like he would have pushed you. He could see your potential before you actually realised it yourself. And he would have pushed you and he would have said, you can do it. And if you said, I can't do it, he would say, no, but I know you can do it. So he'd been somebody who just...
Was that scary?
It is, but it was a challenge that actually brought out the best in you. For me, certainly.
Yeah.
I would say that's how I feel about it. So he would have forced me to do things and take on things that I didn't think I was even in that space yet. So I think I'm so lucky. Like I feel really, really hugely lucky and privileged to have had that opportunity to have his tutelage for so long. And for that whole 10 years, since 2007, right through till the institutions collapsed, he was there encouraging me. He obviously asked me into his team, his ministerial team for agriculture, and then again for health, and then obviously for coming in after him. And so like that is just something I'll always hold dear to my heart, that's what he saw in me, even before I saw it myself.
Tell us about that moment where he says, I'd like you to be the person that is coming after me.
So Martin had already planned to retire because it was 10 years since the Assembly had been restored in 2007. So his plan was to stand down in May. So there was just some initial conversation, but not any sort of in-depth conversation. It was actually Jerry who sat down and talked to me because Martin took sick then.
Yes.
And so he and I had some initial conversation, and even you just constantly feel like, really? You sure? But Jerry and I sat down and talked about it, and he'd asked me, and I was so humbled. At the same time, I felt the weight because it's a huge thing to take on. And I'm not somebody who does anything unless I'm going to do it full throttle. I don't believe in doing things half-heartedly. So when I was asked, it was actually at the Christmas time, Martin was unwell and we knew that he wasn't going to be able to come back. So I knew that all over Christmas, like, and I was so obviously thinking about it and whatever. So whilst I felt hugely honoured, I felt, my goodness, what am I taking on? Am I ready for this? Is this what I want to do? But then I just decided that, yes, I am. Yes, I can. And yes, I will. And I was just delighted, albeit in the most challenging of political circumstances. And then for the Assembly to have collapsed, you know, Martin being so unwell, and then obviously going on to die, it's incredible actually when you think about everything that's happened in the last 3.5 years.
It absolutely is. And, you know, it must have been very personally difficult as well as politically difficult. But you also had to take a lot of media focus that was new, and some of it very misogynist in terms of not appreciating you as your own person within that. What was that like? And what was it like for your family?
It's always worse for your family.
Yeah.
You see, I choose this life. I choose political life. I'm able to roll with the punches in political life, but there's no doubt that women take a disproportionate impact. I find that actually it's not just women in politics, it's women in journalism, it's women in business. We all get such a harder time in general than our male colleagues do. I think some of the imagery which was promoted by other political parties as well at the time of, particularly it was one of Jerry in his pocket, me in Jerry's pocket, you know, that type of stuff. That's to say that a woman couldn't make it by herself, that a woman couldn't just work hard and actually achieve. And to me, I find that all very misogynistic. I find certainly in political life that people, the misogyny is just alive and kicking, and it's something that we all have a duty to try and stamp out and just to call it out whenever we see it and to say, no, it's not on. So some of it is annoying, of course, but I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. In a way, I'm not going to allow people to distract me. I'm going to just keep doing what I'm doing. I'm going to try and be as encouraging to other women as I can be. I think I'll come at it from a very positive way. I'll try to say, the haters are going to hate, people are going to do what they're going to do. My job is to try and encourage other women to get involved in public life, because that's ultimately where women should be, or politics should reflect society. And there's not enough women still in public life. So we've big job of work to do there. But the others will do what they'll do. And sometimes we'll have to call it out. And other times we should just get on with our own positive agenda.
You mentioned that there's big political crisis in terms of the Assembly, but there's others there as well, and not least was Brexit. So you have the entire Brexit fiasco spinning itself out during that time. For you, were there surprises in it? Were there particular challenges in it? And, you know, where do you see it now, you know, with only a few months left to try and get some sort of treaty?
I think we have to always remind ourselves what Brexit was all about. And it was about internal politics in the Tory party. It was about immigration. It was about an English agenda, a narrow English agenda, narrow English nationalist agenda, I think is the way to describe it. And Cameron obviously made a huge error of judgment whenever he called the referendum, not thinking for a second that it was going to be won. I think what Brexit demonstrates to us all is that we are collateral damage to the British government's agenda. And, you know, not for one period throughout this whole Brexit debate, have our interests been taken into account? Have the fact that we have a peace process and the Good Friday Agreement to protect? That's just been pushed to the side, and by all accounts, some British Tories have said throw it in the bin, and we have to fight very hard for it because it was a hard-won peace, and we're not going to allow anybody to throw it in the bin. So I'm not surprised by the actions of the British government. To be honest, I think what we set ourselves a challenge. What do we do? What is our political response to it? So our political response was to achieve special status, which we did. We set out to achieve what is now called the Protocol, which is protections for the Good Friday Agreement and the all-island economy and no hard border. Those things have been achieved. But we're now sitting with, 5 months to go before a potential crash out, which is still a live possibility. I think the jury's out. So the EU side of the negotiating table are saying progress has not been made. And the British government are saying they're still in negotiations. But nobody could sit here today and say that they're not going to crash out without a future trade relationship. Nobody could. You'd be brave to predict that, I think, today. The only thing we have in the middle of all of this is the protocol, and that has to be adhered to. That's now an international obligation that we have to continue to have implemented here. That's the only security we have in the whole Brexit debacle. And as we said from the very start, Brexit and the Good Friday Agreement are not compatible. That remains the case today.
And you mentioned how the issue of a unified Ireland has become an issue during this 3-year period, probably in an unprecedented way. For you, and you're looking at it, has your view changed around how we might come about a united Ireland? Because we can see things like language changing from United Ireland to Shared Island. Things like that are becoming part of the conversation. So for you, what do you think are the things that are pushing things forward, and what do you think are the biggest challenges that remain?
I think one of the positives out of the last number of years is the fact that more and more people are talking about the constitutional position, and more people are engaged. And that's a healthy thing. We need to nourish that. We actually need to encourage it, not just among those of us that want to see United Ireland, but those that actually are yet to be convinced, and even those that are open to being convinced. We now need to have the conversation. I don't mind what it's called, as long as it does what it says in the tin. We just need to engage the debate. We shouldn't allow ourselves to fall into the trap. What happened with Brexit was people were not given accurate information. They weren't given the facts. They were given deliberately misleading information. Let's not do that. There's an opportunity here, because I think we're in the decade of opportunity. You've heard maybe myself and Mary Lou speak about that. We believe in this period, in this decade, we will be voting on the constitutional position. That's what's hardwired into the Good Friday Agreement. If we're going to be voting on it, then now's the time for us all to be brave, to be very generous to each other, actually, about how can we shape the future? What are the opportunities for us all? And how do we find a way for us all to live side by side as a reconciled people? And part and parcel of that is obviously dealing with the past, because we have to in order to move into the future. But for me, it's about how do we have a conversation that's about the continuity of the protections that are in the Good Friday Agreement around identity. Because I don't seek United Ireland for Republicans. It has to be for everybody who lives here. So how do we find ways to engage, find our common ground, and build on that? Instead of looking at all the things that divides us and pushes us apart, what's our common ground? Can we grab onto something that's better for us all? And then how do we make sure that we have that continuity of protection for both Irish and British identity?
Is there anything you can point to that you can go, that's what's encouraging, that you can see something, you go, well, there's something that has made progress in terms of that conversation?
I don't know if it's anything in particular. I think I'm just astounded. I think the fact that there, nearly every university in Ireland, actually, even in Britain, are now involved in studies around what could the constitutional future of here look like. I think there's been game changers in Brexit. I think even COVID has actually made people think differently, because at one stage, at the start of this crisis, there was an attempt to follow the Boris Johnson model to deal with COVID, when clearly that was not what was good for our people here. And I think, so all those things are starting to make people think perhaps differently. So we have to find a way as political leaders to find a way to encourage a debate, a conversation about something that's better, where we all feel safe and comfortable. And that's the kind of space that I think that we're now in. See, that it's only going one way. And that's why I feel, as a United Irelander, this is the time to be generous. This is the time for us to make sure that we're all accommodating of each other, and that people feel safe and secure and are not fearful, because you wouldn't want anybody to be sitting in their home today fearful about if the constitutional position changed, what it would mean for them. So we need to work really hard at it, I think.
And in the middle of all of that, in comes the opportunity, or something else, that was the NDNA, which reestablishes the institutions. How do you, a few months later on from that, there's not been a huge amount of progress in it. How do you feel about the NDNA?
I think it's two things. It's a compromise. It's a political compromise. That's the nature of politics in general, but it's certainly the nature of politics here in the North. It's also a success, because 3 years of the institutions being down, who would have thought? There was times whenever I actually thought perhaps it wasn't politically possible to bring it all back together again. There's been huge successes in it also. I'm glad we had the Assembly and the Executive up to deal with the COVID crisis. So, even when we put it up in January, you would never have thought, who could have predicted that we'd be dealing with a pandemic, a global pandemic? The successes for me in NDNA, there are many, but I think the principal one has been the issue, and this goes right to the heart of the Good Friday Agreement, has been the issue of the Irish language. The fact that for the first time ever in the history of this state, that there's official recognition for the Irish language. And that does two things. It's symbolic in terms of our Irish national identity being respected, so party of esteem. And then also from a rights-based point of view, it's about delivering people actually their rights. Yes, we have not got these things to where we want them to be today because of the COVID crisis, but I think people will be forgiven of that because of the crisis that we've had to deal with. But that now needs to change. It's now time to shift a gear and get back into where we were prior to COVID, albeit planning for what potentially is coming at us in the winter, but at the same time, delivering on the promises that we made to the electorate when we brought it all back together again. So I'm determined to get the Irish Language Act delivered. I'm determined to do all of that work. I think we're now in the space where we've in a good point of the COVID crisis, so it's time let's get back to the NDNA commitments.
When you were told, look, there's a pandemic coming, then it's growing around the world, when was the moment when you realised this is big? Because it very clearly told on you when in the chamber, when you were being questioned about Jim Allister.
Very early on, because we were, in some senses, we were lucky because we were able to watch what was happening in other places. Because they were more advanced than us in terms of the spread. So you were able to watch all of that, and we could see that coming towards us. I think very early on when we were sat down, and obviously myself and Arnie Foster would have been we would have been speaking with the Chief Medical Officer. And whenever you're looking at the predictions of how bad this could have been, where at one stage they were predicting that perhaps 15,000 people could die, there's no training for that. There's no schooling for that in terms of your political responsibility. So I think I realised very early on that this was going to be probably one of the most challenging times that I'd ever worked through. And we were still a fledgling assembly and executive, and differences of opinion and different approaches at the start, but we were able to smooth that out and then get on to looking after people. But I think we knew from very early on that potentially 15,000 people losing their lives, the impact of that, you just knew how big that could be. So we set out our number one priority was to save lives. And so I think probably from early March we knew that was the case. But the day that you referred to where I felt emotional in the Assembly debate, that's because I was asked a question about what do you say to a young mother who has cancer, who's been told that she can't have her treatment, and she's got young kids at home. Like, there'd be something wrong with you if you didn't feel that. So that's a weight that I would have felt as a political leader on my shoulders. What do you say to that person? That's exactly how I felt. So the enormity of it I felt from the very start, but I also thought, I'm glad I'm here to do it. I'm glad I'm here to lead us through this. I'm glad that we have an executive to be able to work our way through it. And I was determined to work night and day to save as many lives as possible. And I feel we're in the position that we are today because of good political leadership throughout the crisis.
And probably a great constituency as well, because people certainly seem to respond in day-to-day lives to the measures that were brought in. Did that surprise you?
People were amazing. Like, I kept saying that because our healthcare workers, our staff, look at who we relied on throughout the crisis. We relied on the healthcare workers, our care workers going into people's homes. We relied on the staff in our hospitals. We relied on our shopkeepers, people who stock the shelves. We relied on our bin men. We relied on probably the category of people in society who are like the lowest paid. But they were out knocking their plans out, working night and day for everybody. And I just found that very humbling just to sit back and think people are absolutely amazing. And again, if you look to the positives that you find in any difficult circumstance, I think it's a sense of community that's now arisen again, something that we've always been very good at here, but that sense of community is there again. And I just think that you could never say enough thank yous to all those people that helped get us through the crisis. The people here were so compliant as well. People were just absolutely excellent. Everything that they were asked to do, they did. And, and it was so hard for so many people. But I think we have to have a serious look at what kind of society do we want to live in? Who do we value in society? How are we protecting those people that actually protect all of us throughout the crisis? And that's a big shake-up, I think, in terms of just the society that we live in. And I'm determined that we don't go back to how things were before. I'm determined that we take the good things out of this and we actually make it stay. Don't let it go away. Don't lose the goodness that we got.
A new type of no return to the status quo.
Absolutely.
He comes back, doesn't he?
He does.
So you've had 3 extraordinary years, really, to the point that you're at now. Is there anything in particular you've learned during that time, apart from patience?
Patience is a virtue. Catch it if you can. Is there anything I've learned? I think that, sometimes you're so busy doing that you actually don't have enough sort of time to reflect. But if I think about the last 3.5 years, even if you take it from taking over from Martin, the Assembly collapsing, and it's two of the biggest elections that delivered the largest vote since the Good Friday Agreement. Jerry standing down, Mary Lou coming in as leader, me going for vice president, being challenged for vice president the year after, these 3 years of negotiations, the Assembly going up, the COVID crisis. If I don't learn something out of that, but that's an immense period of in anybody's scale, that's an immense number of things to come through. So I'd say I've learned. I don't know. I can't pinpoint anything in particular right now. But when I get a break and I get a chance to think about it, I'm quite sure I will. But it's all helped me. I've developed. I'm not the same person. Even probably I'm the same person, but you certainly develop politically all the time, and we should all grow every day and learn from everything that we do. That's certainly my nature. So even from where 3 years ago when I took over from Martin to where I am today, I'd say that's probably a very different picture for many people.
We're going to finish on just a bit of fun, and just to give you kind of 2 options, and you pick one or the other. So cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Have you got one?
Yes. Well, my daughter has one, and so it lives with us.
Of course.
But it's hers. So he's mine whenever he's lovable. He's not mine whenever he's misbehaving. he's a Yorkie poo, a Yorkshire Terrier, and a Poodle cross.
So it's Yappy.
He thinks he's a kangaroo. He jumps like this. But he's not. He's a good dog.
Very good. Northern Tato or Southern Tato?
Oh, big question. This causes a whole debate. Southern Tato.
Yeah, it is. It's just nicer. But not a deal clincher for the shared island thing. No. So EastEnders or Coronation Street?
Neither.
I had a feeling there wasn't a chance you watched it. Hurling or football?
Football.
Well, you would.
Mm-hmm.
You would. What do you reckon with the new arrangements for this year?
It's so hard. Like, it's so difficult. But you know what? It's the one thing that people really, really missed, certainly in the community I grew up at. But I sat was it last Sunday? And so I lived very close to our GAA grounds, and there was a game on, and I could hear the yo-hoing that you always hear, the roars. And I just thought that would do your heart good. That was a brilliant feeling to hear that back again.
I know, it's really missed. It really is. But it could be a final just the week before Christmas.
I know. It's just going to be so strange.
It is really different. And Jerry or Mary Lou? Money missing. But just to finish off, a young woman today looking at this whole world and all of the challenges are there. Have you a message for them coming away from this interview?
Be yourself. Be confident and believe in yourself, because if you don't, others will not. I think that I suppose I would say to any young person, there isn't anything you can't achieve. If you believe in it, just go out and make it happen.
That's lovely. And no better way to finish it. So thank you so much for joining us for what I think you'll agree was a very rich and varied conversation and something you may not have heard before. And thank you to Féile an Phobal for allowing us the time.